For countless millennia, the galaxy had been shaped by species who measured strength in rigid ways, raw muscle, advanced technology, or the cold efficiency of logic. To them, humanity was a curious outlier, a late arrival to the galactic stage, still young and fragile, still struggling with wars and diseases of their own making. The Council of Dominion, a coalition of civilizations that prided themselves on domination through order, regarded humans as an anomaly that needed to be tested, classified, and if necessary, extinguished. Their archives described humans as frail mammals of carbon and water, prone to injury, susceptible to despair, overwhelmed by fear. Yet something unsettled the council. Reports from observation probes told of humans enduring famine, wars, and disasters far longer than projections predicted. Some whispered that humans did not collapse when pushed, they adapted. And so the decision was made. Humanity would be subjected to a grand experiment to determine whether this rumor was true. The council believed it was only a matter of time before humans broke like every other primitive species had. The abductions began quietly. Individuals from different corners of Earth vanished overnight, taken in seamless beams of light, transported to sterile alien chambers aboard colossal ships that drifted in orbit unseen. Families woke to empty beds. Communities grieved. Humanity panicked at first, but the council observed that even in panic, humans showed an infuriating trait: they comforted one another. In captivity, the experiments began. The first trials were simple: isolation chambers devoid of sound and light, meant to crush the mind into silence. Other species had gone mad in hours. The humans, however, whispered to themselves, sang songs from memory, recited prayers, and tapped rhythms on the walls. Days passed, and instead of succumbing to despair, some created entire stories in their heads, keeping their minds alive. The council scientists were disturbed but pressed forward. Physical trials followed. Extreme heat, unbearable cold, toxic atmospheres carefully calibrated to the brink of lethality. The aliens watched as human bodies shook and weakened, but something unexpected happened. Rather than resign, the captives adjusted their breathing, found ways to conserve energy, and in moments of greatest suffering, encouraged each other with quiet words that the translators recorded but could not understand in essence. Simple phrases like "we've survived worse" or "hold on, just a little longer" carried a defiance the aliens had never encountered. Pain was not destroying them, it was binding them. One scientist suggested increasing the cruelty, believing all creatures eventually reach a threshold where they surrender. The trials intensified. Hunger was introduced, thirst prolonged. Other species had begged, clawed, and surrendered their dignity in such conditions. But the humans shared scraps, traded sips of water, and when none was left, they endured together. The aliens began to whisper amongst themselves, confused. These mammals did not prioritize survival of the individual but the survival of the group. For the council, whose entire philosophy was built on hierarchy and dominance, this behavior was incomprehensible. Weeks turned into months, and still the humans persisted. Their bodies suffered scars, bones broke, wounds festered, but they continued. A man with fractured ribs still sang softly to calm the others. A woman who could barely stand dragged another across the chamber floor so he would not be left behind. The aliens took notes frantically, unable to reconcile the evidence. Statistically, this species should have collapsed within days. Yet every act of cruelty they devised seemed to sharpen human resilience instead of dull it. What they had believed to be weaknesses, emotions, empathy, stubbornness, were proving to be the very forces keeping them alive. It was then that something extraordinary occurred. A human, gaunt and trembling, lifted his head during an experiment and laughed. The sound startled the alien observers. Laughter was not in the predicted emotional responses. Translations confirmed its meaning: amusement, defiance, a refusal to yield. Others joined him, laughing in pain, laughing at their tormentors. To the council it was horrifying. This was no madness. It was a conscious rejection of submission. The scientists doubled the trials, convinced that endurance had limits. They increased gravity, deprived them of oxygen, introduced illusions meant to drive them to insanity. Yet each escalation revealed something darker, something far more unsettling. Humans adapted not just physically but mentally. Their brains rewired under duress, forming new thresholds for pain and resilience. Instead of crumbling, they grew sharper, harder, as though suffering was forging them into something new. Reports flowed back to the council high chamber. Words like unstable, dangerous, and unpredictable filled the transcripts. Some argued to terminate the experiment, destroy the humans before they evolved further. Others, fascinated by this anomaly, demanded continuation. The debate raged while the humans endured in silence, unaware they were reshaping galactic history simply by refusing to break. During one critical trial, the aliens pushed the captives beyond any sane measure of survival. Starved, dehydrated, trembling at death's edge, they should have collapsed. Instead, one human staggered to his feet, looked directly into the observing lens and whispered, "Is this all you've got?" The words echoed through the translation systems, and in that moment the council chamber fell silent. For the first time, the rulers of countless worlds realized they were staring into something they could not control. That whisper became a symbol, spreading among the alien observers like a virus. They began to doubt the supremacy of their philosophies. If weakness could not be broken, was it truly weakness? If pain only strengthened, what then did it mean to dominate such a species? Humans had not yet fought back, had not yet resisted in force, and still the aliens felt fear. What would happen if these creatures, who grew stronger through suffering, were given the tools to fight freely? The first section of the grand experiment ended not with human collapse but with alien unease. The council had expected submission, but what they found was defiance clothed in fragility. They had tried to measure humans with equations, but equations could not capture a will that refused to die. And though the captives remained behind cold walls and steel restraints, the true fracture appeared in the council itself. For the first time in its reign, the Dominion feared what it had created. The aliens had not expected resistance to evolve into defiance, and they certainly had not predicted that their subjects would learn to draw strength from every attempt to break them. The experiments escalated with precision and cruelty, but with each new torment inflicted, the humans changed in ways the observers could not comprehend. Pain became endurance, deprivation became adaptation, and fear became unity. It was not just a matter of surviving. It was a process of transforming weakness into power and humiliation into resolve. The first real shift was noticed in the medical chambers, where humans were placed under conditions designed to strip them of every instinct but the will to submit. Oxygen levels were reduced, temperatures dropped, and cycles of deprivation repeated endlessly. The aliens expected collapse, yet the subjects adapted their breathing patterns, slowing their metabolism as if recalling some primal survival code buried in their biology. One subject, nearly at the edge of death, whispered encouragement to the others, reminding them that their suffering had meaning, that it could not be wasted. Such words confused the alien researchers, for among their own kind suffering was the end, not a rallying cry. The more the experiments intensified, the more the humans discovered strength in each other. Shackled in isolation chambers, they developed ways of communicating through subtle knocks and coded whispers. Each sound carried messages of hope, courage, and strategy. What the aliens thought was silence became symphonies of resilience. They underestimated the human instinct to find connection, to turn even captivity into community. Where the aliens saw individuals to be broken, the humans formed bonds stronger than steel. The aliens attempted psychological warfare next. They projected false images, families destroyed, homes burning, entire cities annihilated, believing despair would crush the human spirit. Instead, the opposite occurred. Rage simmered, grief hardened into determination. These illusions, designed to weaken, served instead as reminders of what was worth fighting for. Memories became weapons, stories became shields. When the illusions ended, the humans looked at their captors not with defeat, but with a fire that unsettled even the most hardened alien overseers. Over time, the aliens began to see changes they could not explain. Physical wounds healed faster. Starvation thresholds expanded. Muscles hardened under stress and reflexes sharpened. It was as though the very act of attempting to destroy humanity was forcing it into an accelerated evolution. They had meant to erase resistance, but instead had forged resilience. The cages that were supposed to suppress became crucibles that reforged humanity into something unrecognizable. The alien commanders debated these outcomes, some urging for immediate termination of the experiments, others fascinated by what they believed was a rare evolutionary anomaly. Reports circulated among their ranks describing how humans, once frail and inefficient, were now enduring trials that would have killed any other species. Yet the longer the experiments continued, the more dangerous humans became. Their suffering was not only endured but transformed into knowledge. Each ordeal taught them how to resist, how to exploit even the smallest weakness in their captors' methods. It was during one such trial, an endurance test involving near-freezing water, that the aliens witnessed a breakthrough that shook their confidence. A group of humans, submerged for what should have been lethal durations, synchronized their breathing in unison. They shared warmth by proximity, and when one faltered, the others steadied them with murmured encouragement. Against all logic, they survived. Against all predictions, they adapted. The aliens recorded the data with disbelief, but the humans simply smiled, their eyes alight with something the machines could not measure, an unbreakable spirit born of shared pain. As days turned into weeks, the humans began to anticipate the alien strategies. They recognized patterns in their tormentors' routines, predicting cycles of deprivation and psychological manipulation. They learned to control their reactions, denying the aliens the satisfaction of visible suffering. What the aliens believed was progress in breaking them was instead becoming a training ground for survival. The very attempts to shatter them had forged unity, foresight, and unyielding willpower. In time, whispers spread among the aliens themselves. Some questioned whether they had underestimated the species entirely. Others began to fear what would happen if the humans ever turned this newfound resilience outward. What had begun as an experiment was transforming into something far more dangerous, the creation of an adversary unlike any the galaxy had ever faced. The first sign of rebellion was subtle. During a routine endurance trial, one human deliberately collapsed earlier than expected, drawing attention away from another who used the distraction to memorize the sequence of alien codes displayed on the monitors. A single act of sacrifice opened a path to knowledge. The aliens dismissed it as coincidence, unaware that humans had begun building strategies, weaving defiance into the very fabric of their suffering. Pain had not broken them. It had reshaped them. Hunger had not destroyed them. It had taught them the value of resourcefulness. Fear had not silenced them. It had bound them together. Every cruelty inflicted was recycled into strength. Every attempt to fracture them only welded them closer. By the time the aliens realized the danger, it was too late to reverse what they had unleashed. Humanity, once fragile, now carried within it an edge sharpened by torment. The experiment meant to reduce them to obedience had instead birthed something formidable, something terrifying, something unstoppable. The aliens could not yet see the full extent of what was coming, but already a shadow hung over them, the shadow of a species that had learned to take pain and turn it into power. And in the silence of their cells, as the aliens debated their next move, the humans prepared, not with weapons, not with technology, but with the indomitable force of will that no experiment could extinguish. What was born in chains would not remain in chains forever. The aliens had always believed that control was permanent, that fear was the most reliable leash to keep a subject obedient. What they failed to understand was that fear, when endured long enough, does not remain fear. It transforms. For humans, terror turned into clarity, helplessness into planning, and captivity into strategy. Where other species would crumble, humanity did something the aliens had never seen before. They prepared for the day when the balance would shift. The cracks began invisibly, not in steel or technology, but in the resolve of the captors. They could no longer deny what the experiments revealed. Humans were not weakening. They were evolving under pressure, hardening with each test. Reports circulated of subjects enduring beyond projected limits, of individuals refusing to submit despite pain levels far beyond tolerance. Alien scientists wrote their findings with clinical detachment, but buried between the lines was a fear they dared not name. The humans were no longer data points. They were a threat. The humans knew this too. Deprivation taught them patience, observation, and silence. They watched everything: the way guards carried their weapons, the patterns of footsteps outside the cells, the cycles of light that marked alien shifts. They memorized details no machine was programmed to notice. They stored each fragment of knowledge like a hidden blade, waiting for the moment when knowing would become the same as striking. The first organized act of defiance was almost invisible. A message, coded in knocks along the walls, traveled cell to cell. It was not merely encouragement this time. It was instruction. The aliens assumed the tapping to be nervous habits, unaware that beneath their sensors, a human network had been built out of rhythm and silence. Information flowed, strategies formed. Though they had no weapons, no freedom of movement, and no technology, the humans had something far more dangerous: coordination. When one subject was dragged for testing, another feigned collapse to delay the process, buying precious minutes for others to prepare mentally. When food was distributed, portions were shared to keep the weakest alive. No one was abandoned, because every individual was considered vital to the whole. This philosophy baffled the aliens, who viewed life as disposable and strength as belonging only to the fittest. They could not understand why humans risked themselves for the weakest. They did not yet realize that this unity was the very weapon that made humans indestructible. The turning point came during a sensory deprivation trial. A group of humans was locked in darkness, stripped of sight and sound. The aliens expected psychological collapse within hours. Instead, the humans began to hum. Low, steady, and unified, the sound spread from one voice to many, vibrating through the chamber. It created rhythm, order, and focus. What should have been a descent into madness became a choir of defiance. The aliens watched through their monitors, unsettled by the calm radiating from those who should have been broken. They did not realize they had witnessed the birth of a signal, an unspoken reminder that no matter how deep the darkness, humans could create their own light. Whispers of rebellion reached even the alien guards. Some began to fear entering the human sectors, describing the prisoners as unnervingly calm, eyes filled with fire instead of despair. The very presence of humans began to shift the atmosphere. It was no longer submission they radiated, but silent readiness. The overseers dismissed this as paranoia, yet the fear continued to spread. The humans had not struck a single blow, but already they were winning a war of presence, a war of will. Every attempt at control only deepened this transformation. Sleep deprivation became training in endurance. Pain conditioning became a lesson in mental control. Hunger became a shared ritual of sacrifice, where each morsel was weighed and divided with precision. By trying to erase humanity, the aliens had created a version of it more resilient than ever before. Then came the moment the aliens had dreaded without knowing it. A malfunction occurred during an energy control experiment, releasing one of the restraints earlier than intended. Instead of chaos, the humans reacted with chilling precision. The subject moved not with desperation but with intent, as if rehearsed. He created a diversion, drawing guards into predictable movements, while others feigned collapse to redirect attention. It was over in minutes, contained by the aliens, but the outcome was undeniable. For the first time, humans had tested their captors, and the test had succeeded. From that day forward, fear changed direction. It no longer belonged to the prisoners. It belonged to the captors. The aliens had seen what could not be unseen, that humans were no longer contained by chains. Their will had surpassed any restraint. What had been meant to break them had instead refined them, as fire refines iron into steel. The humans were not waiting for rescue. They were becoming their own answer, their own weapon, their own force of reckoning. Deep in their cells, when the alien monitors dimmed, the humans did not rest idly. They strategized, refined signals, studied their captors, and sharpened their patience. Every scar was remembered, every cruelty catalogued. They were not consumed by hatred, but by purpose. The aliens had taught them how to endure everything, and in doing so, they had unknowingly taught them how to overcome anything. The day of uprising had not yet come, but its shadow stretched long and certain. The aliens did not know when the storm would break, only that it would. What they had believed to be subjects were now soldiers, and what they had tried to extinguish had become unstoppable. And in the silence between trials, with nothing but their thoughts and their unity, the humans whispered the same truth over and over. They could be hurt, but they could never be broken. The breaking point did not arrive with thunder, but with silence. The aliens had grown used to human resilience, but what unsettled them most was how the prisoners no longer responded in ways their models could predict. Every scenario, every variable, every cruel experiment ended the same way, with humans refusing to be defined by the outcome. They had seen this before in other species. At first endurance, then collapse. With humans, endurance became defiance, and defiance became transformation. The aliens began to fear their own research. The numbers were undeniable. Each trial designed to break the human body had instead forced adaptation. Each attempt to manipulate the mind had only strengthened resistance. Humans were evolving faster than their captors could calculate, not biologically, but psychologically, strategically, and collectively. The alien superiority was eroding not because their weapons had weakened, but because the human spirit had become untouchable. Inside the cells, the humans no longer thought of themselves as victims. They had become architects of something larger than survival. Unity had turned into discipline, and discipline into planning. Every knock on the wall was a sentence, every whispered word a strategy, every glance exchanged a confirmation. They were not preparing to escape, they were preparing to conquer. The spark came when a young captive, once considered fragile by the aliens, revealed what he had memorized. He had counted rotations of patrols, measured footsteps, tracked feeding times, studied the way light dimmed before guard changes. He was not alone. Others had gathered pieces of knowledge. The way locks sounded when sealing, the pauses between energy pulses in the restraints, the moments when alien attention drifted. Each piece of the puzzle was small, but together they created a map. The prisoners now had something they had never possessed before: clarity. The aliens noticed the change. They could feel it in the way humans moved, not as scattered individuals but as a single organism with unspoken coordination. Reports circulated of subjects staring too intently, whispering in ways too deliberate, enduring in ways too purposeful. The guards tightened control, increased surveillance, and doubled restrictions. But in doing so, they confirmed what the humans already believed. Fear had shifted sides. The uprising began not with violence but with refusal. During one trial, a human subject declined to scream. He endured in silence, not out of numbness but choice. When the others saw this, they too embraced silence. For the aliens, who relied on measuring suffering through vocal expression, it was chaos. Their data was corrupted. Their systems could not quantify willpower. What had been designed as an arena of pain became an arena of defiance. From there, defiance escalated into disruption. Guards found tools misplaced, doors slightly jammed, and systems failing at inexplicable intervals. The humans had discovered that sabotage required no weapons, only opportunity. A dropped shard of metal could jam a mechanism. A shared cough at the right moment could mask a signal. A delayed response could force a guard to break protocol. Every act was small, but together they formed a war of 1,000 cuts. The aliens panicked. They tightened protocols further, but the more they constrained, the more the humans adapted. Each failure taught them more about their captors. Each punishment became a rehearsal for enduring worse. They were not resisting survival, they were rehearsing war. Then came the night that changed everything. A power fluctuation in the containment grid allowed a single door to falter for a fraction of a second. The aliens scrambled to seal it, but they were too late. A human slipped through, not in desperation, but with precision. He did not run for freedom. He ran to disable systems, to create chaos, to buy time for others. Though he was captured and executed, his mission succeeded. He became the first spark of fire in the darkness. The humans did not mourn as the aliens expected. They did not collapse into despair. Instead, they absorbed his sacrifice as fuel, transforming grief into determination. They whispered his name in the silence, not as loss but as a vow. For every one taken, 10 more would rise. The aliens finally realized what they had created. In their arrogance, they had forged not prisoners but soldiers, not test subjects but revolutionaries. And the revolution was no longer in the future, it had already begun. The humans rose not in chaos but with terrifying coordination. They moved as though they had trained together for years, each action flowing into the next. The aliens' weapons were powerful, but they were built for domination, not suppression of equals. The humans fought with desperation sharpened into precision, with courage refined into strategy. The first wave of rebellion shattered containment in ways the aliens had not calculated. Guards fell, systems crashed, alarms echoed. But amidst the chaos, the humans did not scatter. They advanced, each step calculated, each movement aligned. They were not fighting for escape alone. They were fighting to overturn the order that had chained them. And when the aliens demanded surrender, humanity answered not with words but with silence, unyielding, immovable silence. That silence became the sound of terror echoing through alien ranks. That silence became the anthem of survival turned into dominance. That silence declared to the universe that humans had endured everything, and now nothing could stop them.